The Grand Chamber of the High Synod was not merely a room. It was a geological feature, a cavernous hollow carved into the obsidian heart of the capital moon, vast enough to manipulate its own weather patterns. Clouds of incense, thick with the pheromones of submission and anxiety, drifted through the stalactites that adorned the ceiling like the fangs of a dormant god. Below, in the amphitheater of polished darkstone, the representatives of a dozen star-spanning civilizations gathered in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. There was no rustling of robes, no clicking of mandibles, no hum of cybernetic implants. There was only the low, subsonic thrum of the ventilation systems recycling the air of dignitaries who were, for the first time in 10,000 cycles, united by a singular, paralyzing terror. At the center of the pit, suspended within a containment field of shimmering hard light, floated the data module. It was a jagged, primitive thing by their standards, scarred by the cosmic dust of eons, yet it pulsed with a rhythmic, low-frequency signal that bypassed their sensors and vibrated directly in the fluid sacs of their auditory organs. High Archon Veles, his chitinous armor polished to a mirrored sheen that reflected the dim bioluminescence of the chamber, stepped forward to the podium. His compound eyes, usually unreadable pools of faceted black, flickered with a nervous twitch he could not suppress. He was the leader of the Krilthok Ascendancy, the apex military power of the known galaxy, a warlord whose fleets had shattered the orbital defenses of 100 worlds. Yet, as he looked upon the assembly, his voice trembled, the clicking of his vocal synthesizer struggling to maintain the cadence of authority. "We have translated the timestamp," Veles announced, the sound echoing off the obsidian walls, amplified by the acoustics of the chamber until it sounded like the judgment of history itself. "The artifact is not a weapon of the recent dissident wars. It is not a relic of the progenitors we worship. It is older. The carbon decay analysis and the stellar drift charts embedded in its navigation core confirm the impossible. It has been drifting in the silent void between the galactic arms for 700,000 years. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, a collective shifting of weight and a murmuring of translators working overtime. 700,000 years. It was a span of time that rendered their empires distinct as fleeting moments, dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. Civilizations rose and fell in 10,000 years. Species evolved and went extinct in 100,000. To speak of 700,000 was to speak of the geological, the elemental, the eternal. Veles raised a manipulator claw, silencing the rising tide of whispers. "The object is a buoy, a marker. It was dormant until our deep-range mining fleets in the Cygnus Rift disturbed the gravitational silence of that sector. We woke it, and in waking it has sent a signal, not to us, not to the Synod. It sent a signal into the dark." Minister Alara of the Luminoth, a species of tall, slender humanoids with skin like translucent alabaster and eyes that glowed with inner psionic light, floated forward from her alcove. Her people were the scholars, the keepers of the archives, the ones who claimed to know the secrets of the stars. But her light was dim today, pulsing with the erratic rhythm of fear. "To where, Archon?" she asked, her voice melodic but strained. "If it is a buoy, it signals a harbor. If it is a sentry, it signals a garrison. To where did the signal go?" Veles hesitated, looking at the tactical holographic display that materialized above the pit. He gestured, and the star map expanded, zooming out from their local cluster, past the trade routes, past the frontier zones, into the dead, cold expanse of the galactic west, a region forbidden by ancient superstition and navigational hazard. "It pointed there," Veles said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "To the dead zone. To the region where star formation ceased an epoch ago. To the coordinates where our physics models say nothing should exist but black holes and dust." The hologram shifted, tracking the trajectory of the signal. It terminated at a specific, empty point in the void. But as the resolution increased, the sensors revealed that the point was not empty. "It is a ship," Veles stated, the words falling like stones. "We did not detect it because it does not reflect radar. It absorbs it. It does not emit heat. It consumes it. It has been sitting there in the dark, motionless, for nearly 1,000,000 years. The signal from the buoy reached it 3 standard rotations ago, and for the first time in recorded history, the object has moved." The silence that followed was absolute. A ship that could survive 700,000 years of entropy was not a ship. It was a force of nature. A ship that could hide perfectly in the void was not a vessel, it was a predator. General Korgeth of the Iron Legion, a massive brute of cybernetics and muscle, slammed his fist onto the railing of his pod. "Then we destroy it," he roared, the sound of his aggression breaking the hypnotic fear of the room. If it moves, it can bleed. If it flies, it can be shot down. We do not cower before ghosts. We assemble the Grand Armada. We saturate the grid with antimatter warheads. We strike before it wakes fully. Valles looked at the general with a mixture of pity and disdain. "General," he said softly, "the object is not merely a ship. Our long-range telemetry attempted to measure its mass. The sensors failed, not because of interference, but because the mass reading was so high it registered as a planetary body. It is not a dreadnought. It is a world ship, and it is decelerating. It is coming here." The panic broke. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of shouting, screaming, and the gnashing of claws. Ambassadors accused one another of sabotage. Religious leaders wailed that the end times had arrived. Scientists frantically tried to upload data to their homeworlds. Through the chaos, Valles stood motionless, watching the hologram. The red dot representing the ancient vessel was moving with terrifying speed, ignoring the gravitational drag of nearby stars, slicing through the fabric of space-time with a propulsion system that defied all known laws of physics. It was not using hyperspace lanes. It was not using warp gates. It was simply pushing the universe out of its way. The decision was made not by consensus, but by desperation. A delegation would be sent. A unified fleet representing the combined might and wisdom of the galaxy would intercept the vessel at the edge of the heliopause of the binary system where the Synod sat. They would not attack, not yet. They would attempt to communicate. They would attempt to understand the nature of the entity that had slept for 700,000 years. And so, the fleets gathered. It was a sight of unparalleled majesty and futility. The sleek silver needles of the Luminoth glided alongside the brutal, blocky battleships of the Iron Legion. The organic, bio-grown cruisers of the Veridani swarm writhed in the vacuum, their living hulls pulsing with plasma. Thousands of vessels, a tapestry of metal and light, formed a defensive wall against the dark. But as they waited, hanging in the silence of space, the crews felt the crushing weight of insignificance. Their sensors screamed warnings as the object approached. It did not drop out of warp with a flash of Cherenkov radiation. It did not tear a hole in reality. It simply faded into existence, as if it had always been there and they had just finally noticed it. The size of the vessel was beyond comprehension. It eclipsed the binary stars, casting a shadow that swallowed the fleet. It was a monolith of matte gray metal, scarred and pitted, shaped like a great spearhead broken at the shaft. There were no lights, no windows, no visible engines, just miles upon miles of silent, indifferent armor. It rotated slowly, a movement that took minutes to complete a single degree, yet the displacement of space caused gravity waves that rocked the smaller escort destroyers. On the bridge of the flagship High Justice, Archon Valles gripped the command rail, his knuckles white beneath his chiton. "Status," he croaked. "Shields at maximum," the tactical officer reported, her voice trembling. "Weapons locked, but, Archon, I cannot get a target lock." The targeting computers refuse to recognize it as a valid enemy. It registers as background radiation. "Hail them," Valles ordered. "On all frequencies, mathematics, pictorials, binary, linguistic archives, send everything." The communications officer worked frantically, broadcasting a stream of data that contained the sum total of their civilization's knowledge of language. They waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The great ship drifted closer, its shadow now engulfing the flagship entirely. The silence from the vessel was more terrifying than any weapon discharge. It was the silence of a grave. Then, without warning, the High Justice shuddered, not from an impact, but from a sound. A resonance. It came through the hull, through the deck plates, vibrating the very bones of the crew. It was a low, mournful tone, like the tolling of a bell the size of a planet. "T-H-R-O-O-O-M." The lights on the bridge flickered and died, replaced by the red emergency glow. "We are being scanned," the science officer whispered, looking at her console with wide, terrified eyes. "Active scanning, high-energy neutrino bursts. They are reading us, down to the molecular level. They know our biology, our technology, our hull composition. They know everything." The resonance stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Then a single channel opened on the main view screen. Static washed over the display, clearing slowly to reveal a simple, stark image. It was a glyph. A circle with a triangle inside it, and a single vertical line dissecting them both. It was geometric, precise, and utterly alien. A voice spoke. It did not use the clicking of the Krilthok or the melody of the Luminoth. It was a synthesized voice, flat, metallic, and devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undertone of immense, weary power. "This is the Terran Arc Vessel AETRNITAS," the voice boomed, translated instantly by the ship's universal linguistic matrix, which seemed to struggle with the archaic syntax. "Identify yourselves. Why have you awakened the listener?" Valles stepped into the transmission field, straightening his posture. He had to project strength. He represented the Synod. I am High Archon Valles of the Krilthok Ascendancy, speaker for the Galactic Synod. You have entered our sovereign space. We demand to know your intentions. You are a relic of a time long past. Identify your creators. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. The glyph on the screen pulsed. Intentions, survival, creators, humanity, status, extant. Humanity, Valles repeated the word. It was a sound that appeared in the oldest, most fragmented archives of the Luminoth, a myth of a species that had vanished before the Great Cooling. You claim to be human. We have no record of your empire. We have no record of your flight. EMPIRES fall, the voice replied. We did not flee. We waited. Prepare for physical contact. Diplomatic envoy authorized. Do not resist. Resistance is inefficient. Before Valles could issue a command, a beam of light, brilliant blue and cold as ice, erupted from the flank of the dark ship. It struck the High Justice, bypassing its shields as if they were mist. The bridge crew cried out, bracing for disintegration, but there was no pain. Instead, there was a sensation of weightlessness, a dissolving of reality. Valles, Minister Alara, and General Korgath found themselves standing not on their bridge, but in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were white, a blinding, clinical white that seemed to stretch into infinity. The floor was a smooth, black material that felt like glass but absorbed the sound of their footsteps. The air here was different, crisp, slightly higher in oxygen, smelling of ozone and soil, rich, fertile soil. At the center of the room stood a desk. A simple wooden desk, jarringly anachronistic amidst the high technology. Behind it sat a figure. It was bipedal, soft-skinned, lacking the protective carapace of the Krilthok or the elegance of the Luminoth. It wore a gray uniform with no insignia other than a small patch on the shoulder matching the glyph from the screen. The figure was reading a physical book, turning the paper pages with a slow, deliberate motion. It did not look up immediately. The alien stood frozen, unsure whether to attack or bow. The figure was small, physically unimposing, yet the aura of the room was heavy with a pressure that made their instincts scream predator. The human closed the book. The sound of the cover snapping shut echoed like a gunshot. He looked up. His face was lined, his eyes the color of steel, tired and infinitely old. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had been working a double shift for 700,000 years. I am Commander Vance, the human said. His voice was not the synthesized boom of the ship, but a quiet, raspy baritone. He spoke their trade language perfectly, with an accent that sounded archaic. Please sit, if your physiology allows it. He gestured to 3 chairs that materialized out of the floor nanites. Valles remained standing. We are prisoners. You are guests, Vance corrected, leaning back. Prisoners imply we have a use for you or that we fear you. We have neither. General Korgath bristled. You speak with arrogance, little soft thing. My fleet surrounds your vessel. We have firepower enough to crack a moon. Vance looked at the general. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at him with a profound lack of interest. General, your fleet is currently running on emergency power because my ship's passive energy wake drained your capacitors. Your antimatter warheads are based on unstable isotope decay, a technology we abandoned before we left our gravity well. If you fire, the containment fields will fail before they leave your launch tubes. You would vaporize yourselves. I have remotely locked your firing mechanisms to prevent you from committing mass suicide. You're welcome. Korgath opened his mouth, then closed it. He tapped his wrist comms, dead static. He looked at Valles, fear finally piercing his bravado. The human had disarmed the most powerful armada in history without standing up. Minister Alara stepped forward. She sensed no deception in the human, only a deep, melancholic truth. You said you waited, she said softly. 700,000 years. Why sleep for so long? Why hide in the dark? Vance sighed, rubbing his temples. Because of the noise. He said, an enigmatic answer that frustrated Valles. Noise, Valles demanded. We are the Synod. We are the Order of the Galaxy. We brought peace to the stars. You brought chatter, Vance said, standing up. He was not tall, but he seemed to loom over them. He walked to the white wall, and with a wave of his hand, it turned transparent. They looked out not at space, but at a massive internal bay of the ship. Inside, there were rows upon rows of stasis pods, millions of them, stretching for miles, a sleeping civilization. When my people ruled this galaxy, Vance began, we were loud, we expanded, we conquered, we terraformed. We thought we were the masters of the material plane. We built wonders you cannot imagine. Dyson's spheres around neutron stars. computers that use the spin of electrons to calculate the future. "Where are they?" Alara whispered. "Where are the ruins?" "We cleaned them up," Vance said. "We dismantled them because we realized we were making a mistake. We were shouting in a dark forest, assuming we were the only predator." He turned back to them. "Do you know what the Fermi paradox is?" The aliens shook their heads. "It was an old theory," Vance explained. "If the universe is old and life is common, why hadn't we met anyone? Why was it silent? We thought the answer was distance or time. We were wrong. The answer was that the smart civilizations, they stay quiet." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop. "There is something else," Vance said. "Something that lives in the spaces between galaxies, something that feeds on high-energy civilizations. It doesn't eat flesh, it eats structure, it eats order, it tracks the manipulation of space-time. Warp drives, hyperlanes. The more you build, the brighter you shine. And when you shine bright enough, it comes." Valles felt a chill run through his endoskeleton. "The void," he whispered. "Our legends speak of the great silence. The Reapers, the inhibitors, the great filter. We called them the swarm," Vance said. "They came for us 700,000 years ago. We fought them. We burned half the galaxy to stop them. We realized we couldn't win by force. They are infinite. So we did the only thing we could. We turned off the lights." Vance gestured to the stasis pods. "We built the Eternitas. We built the listeners' ships like this one, designed to mimic dead rocks. We packed the best of our genome, our culture, our history into these arcs, and we went to sleep. We set the wake-up protocols to trigger only when two conditions were met. One, the swarm had passed, starved of energy, moving on to another galaxy. Two, a new civilization had risen, one loud enough to attract them back." The implication hit the Synod delegates like a physical blow. "We," Valles asked, his voice barely a click. "We are the bait." "You are the alarm clock," Vance said grimly. "Your mining operations, your wars, your unshielded warp networks, you are screaming into the void. The buoy picked up the resonance of a returning swarm scout. They are coming back because of you." General Korgath slumped into a chair, his aggression gone. "Then we are doomed. If the ancients, if humanity, could not defeat them, what hope have we?" Vance walked back to his desk and pressed a button. The room hummed. The view of the stasis pods changed. The lights on the pods were turning from amber to green. The mist of cryofluid was venting. "We didn't sleep to hide forever," Vance said, his voice gaining a new strength, a steel edge of determination. "We slept to prepare. We slept to let the galaxy regrow its resources, to let new variations of life emerge. We are not just survivors, General. We are the shield. We spent the last 700,000 years in simulation. Our minds were active. We have been wargaming this fight for an eternity. We have developed physics you cannot comprehend. We have solved the equations of the swarm." The human looked at them, and for the first time there was a spark of something fierce in his eyes. It was the look of a predator protecting its young. "You have numbers," Vance said. "You have fleets. You have the raw materials. We have the technology. We have the strategy. And we have the rage of a species that had to bury itself alive to survive." "What do you propose?" Alara asked, hope flickering in her psionic aura. "Integration," Vance said. "We will upgrade your fleets. We will teach you how to mask your energy signatures. We will unite the Synod under a single tactical command. The Eternitas is not just a ship. It is a foundry. We can print fleets, but we need crews. We need you." The initial shock of the meeting gave way to a frantic, terrified, yet hopeful diplomacy. The human capability was undeniable. As the delegation watched, Vance demonstrated the power of the Eternitas. A damaged moon in the local system, destabilized by the fleet's arrival, was caught in a gravitational shear. Vance tapped a sequence on his console. A beam of golden light lashed out from the ship, wrapping the moon in a lattice of energy. In seconds, the tectonic instability was quelled. The gravity well was smoothed. It was the act of a god performed with the casual ease of a janitor fixing a leak. But the true test was not technology, it was trust. The Synod was a political snake pit. The Krilthok hated the Luminoth. The Iron Legion despised the Veridani. How could they unite? Vance did not use force to unite them. He used perspective. He took the delegates to the observation deck, a dome of glass atop the Eternitas. He showed them the galaxy not as a map of territories, but as a single, fragile organism. He showed them the simulation of the swarm, a dark, creeping necrosis that consumed stars. "This is what comes," Vance said. "It does not care about your borders, it does not care about your religions, it is entropy given form. You can die separately, clinging to your petty hatreds, or you can live together. Humanity made its choice. We chose to sleep in the dark so that one day we could stand in the light again. Now it is your choice. The Act of Unity was signed 3 days later. It was not signed with ink, but with energy. The fleets of the Synod docked with the Eternitas. The scale of the human vessel became apparent as entire armadas disappeared into its hangars. The cultural exchange was chaotic but rapid. Human engineers, awake from stasis, pale and gaunt but moving with frightening efficiency, boarded the alien ships. They stripped out the primitive warp drives, replacing them with slipstream folders. They tore out the unstable antimatter cores and installed zero-point siphons. The aliens watched the humans with a mix of awe and horror. The humans were strange. They did not have the natural armor of the Krilthok or the psychic unity of the Luminoth. They were soft, individualistic, prone to arguments, and possessed of a bizarre, dark humor. They named their catastrophic weapons after ancient myths or small, furry animals. They drank toxic liquids for recreation. But when they worked, they were a single organism. They were driven by a terrifying focus. They called it spite. "Why do you fight so hard for us?" Alara asked Vance one evening as they watched the refit of the Luminoth flagship. "We are strangers to you." "You are life," Vance said. "The universe is mostly dead rock and radiation. Life is the exception. It is the error in the math. We like the error." The peace, however, was shattered sooner than expected. The sensors of the Eternitas screamed. The deep space buoys, the ears of the fleet, went silent one by one. "They are here," Vance announced in the war room. The hologram showed a darkness moving across the stars. It was not ships. It was a cloud of black shards, millions of miles wide, blocking out the light of the stars behind it. The swarm. The combined fleet launched. It was a sight that would have been impossible a week ago. Krilthok dreadnoughts, reinforced with human armor, flew alongside Luminoth frigates armed with human railguns. And at the center, the Eternitas, the sleeping giant, fully awake now. Its engines glowed with the light of a captured star. The battle was joined in the nebula of the dead zone. The swarm descended like a plague of locusts. They were crystalline entities, shifting and jagged, firing beams of anti-energy that unraveled matter. The initial clash was brutal. The Synod ships took heavy losses. The Krilthok lines buckled. "Hold the line," Vales screamed over the comms, his ship rocking under the impact. "For the Synod." "No," Vance's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold. "Not for the Synod, for the future. Eternitas to all wings, initiate protocol Gungnir." The human ship opened fire. It did not fire lasers. It fired something else. It fired projectiles of condensed spacetime. Where they hit, the swarm ships didn't explode. They ceased to exist, folded into micro-singularities. The Eternitas was a dancer in the chaos, spinning, deflecting attacks with shields that converted enemy fire into engine power. But the swarm was adapting. They began to merge, forming a massive serpentine construct, a world-eater that targeted the Eternitas. It latched onto the human ship, its mandibles tearing at the hull. "They are boarding us," the tactical officer shouted. Vance stood on the bridge of the Eternitas. He didn't look afraid, he looked sad. "Let them in," he whispered. "Commander," Vales asked, his hologram flickering on the bridge. "You are dropping shields." "I am inviting them to dinner," Vance said. The swarm poured into the Eternitas. They rushed through the corridors, slaughtering the automated defenses. They reached the core. They expected a power source. They found a trap. The core of the Eternitas was not a reactor. It was a prison. Inside, the containment field held the essence of a captured swarm queen from the ancient war. The humans had not just slept, they had studied their enemy up close. "Release the subject," Vance ordered. The containment field dropped. The captured queen, driven mad by 700,000 years of isolation and human psychological conditioning, shrieked. It was a psychic scream that tore through the swarm's hive mind. It was a virus, a code of chaos introduced into a system of perfect order. The swarm outside paused. Their coordination shattered. They turned on each other. The massive serpentine construct unraveled as its constituent parts began to fight for dominance. "Now," Vance roared, "all fleets fire at will." The galaxy lit up. The combined firepower of the Synod, amplified by human tech, poured into the confused mass of the swarm. It was a slaughter. The ancient enemy, the terror of the dark, burned. When the smoke cleared, the Eternitas was scarred, venting atmosphere, but alive. The swarm was reduced to drifting dust. The victory celebration was subdued. The cost had been high, but the realization of what had happened was higher. The Synod realized that they were no longer alone. They were no longer the apex. They were the younger siblings, protected by a brother who had returned from the dead. In the aftermath, the Eternitas did not leave. It took up orbit around the Synod's sun. The humans began to wake up in greater numbers. They were not rulers. They refused titles of leadership. They were advisors, teachers, explorers. They sent ships out to the dark corners of the galaxy, looking for other sleepers, other arcs. Vance stood on the observation deck with Vales. The Krilthok Archon was different now, humbler. "You saved us," Vales said. "You could have ruled us." "We don't want to rule," Vance said, looking at the stars. "We just want to make sure the music keeps playing. We want to hear the noise. Silence. Silence is the only enemy." Vales looked at the human. He saw the weariness but also the peace. "What now, Commander?" "Now," Vance smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Now we rebuild, and we keep listening, because the universe is a big place, Vales, and I bet we aren't the only ones who were hiding." The twist came a year later. The humans had repaired the deep space sensor array, the ear that had started it all. They turned it toward the Andromeda galaxy, scanning for threats. They didn't find a threat, they found a message. It was a signal, faint, ancient, but unmistakably structured. It wasn't swarm, it wasn't random, it was a broadcast. Vance played it for the High Council. The room fell silent as the static cleared. A voice, strange and harmonic, spoke in a mathematical language that the translation matrix decoded slowly. "This is the Andromeda Initiative. We detected the energy discharge of your war. The swarm has been purged in your sector. Congratulations. We are opening the bridge. Prepare for arrival." Vales looked at Vance. "The Andromeda Initiative, who are they?" Vance stared at the screen, his face paling, then breaking into a look of absolute, terrifying wonder. "The swarm didn't just attack this galaxy," he whispered. "They attacked them all. We thought we were the only survivors. We thought we were the last arc." He pointed to the data stream. "That signature, that coding style, it's not alien." "What is it?" Ilera asked. "It's a fork," Vance said, tears forming in his eyes. "When we built the Eternitas, there was a disagreement. One faction wanted to sleep and hide. Another faction wanted to run so far and so fast that the swarm couldn't catch them. They left for Andromeda 1,000,000 years ago." The screen showed a massive rift opening at the edge of the system. A ship emerged. It was not a dark, scarred monolith like the Eternitas. It was shining, white and gold, sleek and evolved. It was humanity, but a humanity that had not slept. A humanity that had kept running, kept evolving, kept building for 1,000,000 years without pause. The Eternitas was the shield. The new arrival was the sword. Vance laughed, a sound of pure relief. "We aren't the Guardians anymore," he said. "We're the little brothers." The universe had just gotten a lot larger, and for the first time in 700,000 years, humanity was not just surviving. It was reuniting. The aliens of the Synod looked from the ancient, scarred ship to the shining new arrival and realized with a shudder of awe that the galaxy didn't belong to them. It never had. They were living in a house built by giants, and the giants had just come home for a family reunion. The story of the sleeping ear was over. The story of the awakened galaxy had just begun. The quiet that followed the arrival of the Andromeda fleet was not the silence of the void, nor the silence of terror that had gripped the High Synod months prior. It was a silence of anticipation, a collective holding of breath spanning a dozen star systems. The Eternitas, the great gray monolith that had served as the shield of the galaxy, now looked almost primitive beside the newcomer. The vessel that had emerged from the intergalactic rift was named the Novus Evum. It did not utilize the brutalist, function-over-form architecture of the Eternitas. It was a construct of light and fluid metal, its hull shifting and rippling like the surface of a Mercury ocean. It was smaller than the Eternitas, yet the energy readings radiating from it were logarithmic orders higher. It pulsed with the power of a contained hypernova. Commander Vance stood in the airlock of his ship, waiting. He had exchanged his worn fatigue uniform for the dress uniform of the old Earth Coalition, navy blue, gold piping, the fabric preserved in stasis just as he had been. He felt an emotion he hadn't experienced since the day the cryopod lid hissed shut 700 millennia ago: inadequacy. He was a soldier of the 23rd century of the human era. He was a relic, the beings on that white ship. They were his descendants, yes, but separated by a gulf of time and evolution that made the difference between a lungfish and a primate seem trivial. The airlock cycled. There was no hiss of decompression, no mechanical clanking. The barrier simply dissolved into mist. 3 figures walked through. They were human, undeniably so. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, facial features that Vance recognized. But they were perfect. Their skin was flawless, glowing with a faint subdermal luminescence. They were tall, averaging 7 feet, and they moved with a grace that defied gravity. They wore robes of woven light that shifted color with their mood. The leader, a woman with eyes like nebulae, stopped before Vance. She did not salute. She did not bow. She extended a hand, palm up, in an ancient gesture of peace. "Grandfather," she said. Her voice was not spoken. It was projected directly into Vance's auditory cortex, bypassing his ears. It was a multi-layered sound, carrying the weight of data, emotion, and history in a single word. Vance took her hand. It was warm, solid. "I am Commander Vance of the Arkship Eternitas," he managed to say, his voice raspy. What are you?" "I am Oreo," she replied. "I am of the Transandromeda diaspora. We are the runners, you are the sleepers. We have remembered you in our songs for 10,000 generations. We thought you were a myth, the lost tribe who stayed behind to hold the door." Behind Vance, the alien delegation, Vales, Alara, and Korgath, watched with wide eyes. To them, the Eternitas humans were gods. These new arrivals were something else entirely. They were angels, or monsters. It was hard to tell the difference. "We detected the gravimetric shear of your weapon," Oreo continued, walking past Vance into the bay of the Eternitas. She looked around at the scarred bulkheads, the primitive conduit piping, the utilitarian design. She ran a hand over a wall, and the metal seemed to sing under her touch. "Protocol Gungnir, crude, effective, dangerous. You cracked the local space-time manifold. It took us weeks to smooth it out from the other side." "We were busy not dying," Vance said defensively. Oreo smiled, and the air in the room became warmer. "I do not criticize, grandfather. I marvel to fight the swarm with this." She gestured to the ship. "It is like fighting a star dragon with a sharpened stick. You are brave, insanely, wonderfully brave." The meeting moved to the grand chamber of the Synod, down on the planet below. The arrival of the Novus Evum had caused a panic among the civilian populations, but the presence of the Eternitas in orbit, the good giants, kept the peace. The Synod Hall was packed. Every species, every faction wanted to see the outcome of the reunion of man. Oreo stood at the center of the pit, flanked by Vance. The contrast was striking. Vance, the weary soldier, the survivor of the apocalypse. Oreo, the celestial being, the child of the endless voyage. "The swarm is not gone," Oreo announced, her voice filling the cavern without the need for amplifiers. "You destroyed a splinter fleet, a scavenger pack. The main body of the Void Hungers is moving through the Virgo supercluster. They consume galaxies like locusts consume grain. We have been running from them, fighting a retreating war across 3 million light-years." A murmur of despair ran through the aliens. They had just celebrated a victory. Now they were being told it was merely a skirmish. "But we did not come back to run," Oreo said, her eyes flashing. "We came back because we hit a wall. The edge of the observable universe is not empty. It is a barrier. We cannot go further. So we turned around. We stopped running. We spent the last 100,000 years building the Novus fleet. We developed the Halo Matrix. We weaponized stars. And we remembered the signal from the Milky Way, the sleeping Earth. We knew if you were still alive, you would have the one thing we lost in our evolution." "And what is that?" Vales asked, stepping forward. "You seem to Ave everything. Infinite energy, immortality, physics that is magic." Oreo looked at Vance. "Gritty, stubborn, illogical malice," she said. "We evolved past rage. We evolved past hate. We are logical. We are peaceful. When we fight the swarm, we fight with efficiency. But the swarm adapts to efficiency. They are a hive mind of pure logic. To beat them, you need something unpredictable. You need the capacity for irrational violence. You need the human spirit of the 23rd century. Vance chuckled. It was a dry, dark sound. "You need us to be the bad guys." "We need you to be the hammer," Oreo corrected. "We will be the anvil. We have the technology to shield this galaxy. We can wrap the Milky Way in a Dyson field that makes us invisible to the swarm's sensors. But we need time. And to get time, someone has to go out there into the void between galaxies and make a lot of noise. Someone has to draw their fire." Vance nodded slowly. He understood. The Eternitas was old. It was falling apart. But it was built for one thing, war. "My crew is awake," Vance said. "We have 700,000 years of back pay to collect, and we're bored." The plan was audacious. The Eternitas, refitted with Novus technology, would not stay to defend the Synod. It would leave. It would jump into the dark space between the Milky Way and Andromeda. It would activate every beacon, every transmitter, every weapon. It would scream into the dark, challenging the swarm. It would draw the main hive away from the galaxy, buying Oreo and her people the time to construct the Great Shield. The preparations took months. The Synod was transformed. Under the guidance of the Novus engineers, the alien civilizations were elevated. Post-scarcity technology was distributed. Hunger was ended. Disease was cured. The Krilthok, the Luminoth, the Veridani, they ceased to be squabbling empires and became the first citizens of the Galactic Union. Humanity was the catalyst. The sleepers gave them the spirit. The runners gave them the tools. The day of departure was a day of mourning and celebration. The Eternitas hung in high orbit, its gray hull now laced with veins of Novus gold circuitry. It looked like a veteran knight wearing a king's armor. Vance stood on the bridge. His crew, a mix of original humans and alien volunteers who had pledged their lives to the mission, manned the consoles. Vales was there. He had resigned his position as Archon to serve as the tactical officer. "It is a good day to die," Vales clicked, his mandibles twitching with excitement. "It's a better day to make the other poor bastard die," Vance muttered, quoting an ancient general. On the screen, Oreo's face appeared. She looked sad. "You know this is a one-way trip, grandfather. The odds of survival are." "Never tell me the odds," Vance cut her off. "Just keep the lights on for us." "We will," Oreo promised. "We will remember you. The galaxy will remember you." Eternitas out. The link cut. Vance looked at the star field, the endless black. "Engage slipstream," he ordered. The ship did not accelerate. It vanished. It punched a hole in the universe and fell into it. They emerged in the void. No stars, just the crushing darkness of intergalactic space. The sensors showed nothing for 1,000,000 miles. "Activate the lure," Vance said. The ship began to pulse. It emitted a signal on every frequency, a chaotic, screaming broadcast of human music, heavy metal, classical, speeches, data, noise. It was a beacon of life in the desert of death. And the dark answered. Sensors lit up red. The swarm was there, not a fleet. An ocean. A tide of black shapes moving against the black background, visible only by the occlusion of distant galaxies. "Target-rich environment," Vales noted dryly. "Weapons free," Vance said. "Let's show them why you don't wake the human." The battle in the void was not recorded by any history book, for there were no witnesses. But the astronomers of the Milky Way saw the flashes. For years, they watched the distant dark light up with the fires of impossible explosions. They saw supernovae trigger where no stars existed. They saw beams of light that spanned light years. The Eternitas fought. It fought with the fury of the damned. It drew the swarm in, pulling them away from the galaxy, deeper into the void. It became a legend, a ghost ship that would not die. Back in the Milky Way, the Great Shield was completed. The galaxy was hidden safe, a garden in the cosmic wilderness. The species of the Synod thrived. They built statues to the sleepers. They told stories to their hatchlings of the gray ship and the golden fleet. And 700,000 years later, a young astronomer of the Krilthok, looking through a hypertelescope at the distant edge of the universe, saw something. It was a blink, a Morse code signal, ancient and weak, coming from the depths of the void. "I still hear. Send more ammo." The astronomer smiled. The ear was still listening, th. E-Human was still fighting, and as long as they fought, the galaxy would sleep in peace. The timeline of humanity had been broken, split, and reunited only to separate again. But the core truth remained constant. Whether sleeping in stone or running in light, humanity was the defiance of entropy. They were the ones who looked at the dying of the light and said, "Not today." The galaxy spun on, a wheel of stars and life, protected by the ghost in the dark. The terrifying, dangerous, sleeping ship had become the eternal watcher, the guardian angel with a shotgun, ensuring that the silence would never again be absolute.